Wilson, swing. This is going to be a home run. Unbelievable! I don't believe what I just saw.
Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. In the 1950s, national point-shaving scandals raised doubts about the integrity of college basketball. But one night in 1955, a burly man from an obscure college in Pennsylvania barged into Madison Square Garden and played with such force and brilliance that no one doubted his intentions. The prototype of the modern power forward, he was destined to star in the pros. And for 3 years, that's exactly what he did. Then, with chilling speed, his mammoth talent was snuffed out. And after a long, painful lingering, he left us with only the memory of his greatness.
The Royals are fighting hard to get back in the game. Stokes finally gets the rebound and garners his 29th point of the contest. That man Stokes is still haunting the Warriors.
You sitting under a tree at a playground, a bottle of pop and bag of potato chips, and you hear a guy say, "Man, let me tell you what I saw Mo do." And then you move closer.
He would have been certainly easily one of the 50 top players in the history of the NBA.
The defensive game plan at that particular time was, we had to stop him.
He was clearly decades ahead of his time in terms of the total package of a basketball player.
Maurice Stokes, as usual, grabs the rebound and heads up court.
When you saw him play, you immediately said, that's Maurice Stokes.
Maurice would let a guard get by on the dribble, and Maurice reach around from the other side, steal the ball, go down the other way for a layup. And at that time, that was unheard of.
Oh, he was a bull. When he started to move, he was so strong that he's going to take up so much room, it's going to be difficult to stop him. He was dominating.
It was such a freak accident, it caught everyone completely by surprise.
I was shocked. I mean, I was absolutely shocked.
He couldn't speak. He had trachs, a trach in his throat, and it was very, very upsetting.
Americans are dreamers. We look at people and we say, wow, what could Mickey Mantle have been with good knees? What could Muhammad Ali have been if they hadn't stolen the 3 years from him? And what would Maurice Stokes have been had he been able to run the full length of his career and not been struck down so young?
Born June 17, 1933, within smelling distance of the Pittsburgh steel mills, Maurice Stokes was blessed with strong, motivated parents.
They were both rather small in height, and you could tell from visiting the home that they were a nice family.
Mr. Stokes was a quiet man, too. He went to work every day, never missed a day, and he took very good care of his family.
His mom was the person that seemed to be somewhat outgoing, so I think Maurice took a little bit of both. His dad, I recall as being somewhat of a no-nonsense guy. And Maurice, when he got down to business, he was a no-nonsense kind of guy, too, even though he had that nice, easy way about him.
Well, he always hustled. Had paper out, put in shovel coal, cut grass, energetic, trying to make a buck here, a buck there.
He often said to me he didn't know if he would have been able to go to college were it not for a basketball scholarship. It was very important for him to be a good basketball player, to get a good education.
Carrying a full complement of physical abilities that fit the demands of basketball, Stokes taught himself the subtleties of the game on the Pittsburgh playgrounds.
Maurice could do just about anything. All he did was play basketball. He didn't try running track or anything like that. But he seemed to pick up and get better and better every year that you saw him play.
We had social events where we go to the YMCA on Fridays to dances. He loved to dance. Loved to talk to young ladies, you know. His sister, which was his twin Clarice, was well-liked, and fellas would try to date her, but Stokes would ride shotgun.
And I don't think that because of Maurice's size and that anybody was going to fool around with Clarice at all.
In high school, he was a good ball player, but he wasn't the big gun on the team.
The 6'5" senior elicited almost a dozen scholarship offers as Westinghouse High won its second straight city championship. At 17, Stokes looked toward college with a hopeful eye, despite the limitations of the times.
It wasn't easy for a black man to get a scholarship at major colleges. You look at your top colleges, your Kentucky, North Carolina, they were primarily all made up of white players.
But if you put that into perspective, in 1950 and 51 when he was being recruited, this was 3 or 4 years before the Brown versus Board of Topeka, Kansas, and that decision that really gave impetus to the civil rights movement.
I know my parents, especially my father, did not believe that a university was going to pay for Maurice Stokes to play basketball or for myself. They believed that we should prepare ourselves basically to get a job working in the mill. And I think Maurice and I, we both wanted something better.
What happened with Stokes is that many of the coaches who looked at him felt that there were other players who were better, but they could only have maybe 3 or 4 blacks on the team. And as a result of that, he kept moving down the list.
But Coach Skip Hughes of St. Francis College in Loretto, Pennsylvania, rated Stokes so high that he recruited Gene Phelps, a black Westinghouse teammate, just to make Stokes feel comfortable.
Phelps being here was a great advantage, and I think it was a smart move on the part of Coach Hughes to bring Phelps in first and then get Stokes later.
Stokes entered St. Francis in 1951. What no one could have known then was that Stokes and the Frankies would rise from obscurity to national prominence. Having spent all of his 18 years in the Pittsburgh area, Maurice Stokes found the rural environment of St. Francis a radical change.
There were fewer than 1,000 students here. It was an all-white school, mostly Catholic students attending it, and he was not Catholic, and it had to be a culture shock for him. In his letters, he spoke of that. He spoke about the isolation and the loneliness that he felt during the years here.
After bulking up to 230 pounds, he averaged 17 points as a freshman. In the summers, he returned to Pittsburgh's Mellon Park for top-flight pickup games.
Every summer, guys that were playing college ball, high school ball, would gather at Mellon Park, shoes up sides, and play all day long.
Reese was he was the first prototype big man. He was mobile, agile, and he was terribly hostile.
There was a fellow named Ivan. He was small in stature, and I used to say, Maurice, give him a break. You're way above him. He said, he's out here, he has to play. And Maurice took no prisoners with him.
He was ferocious on the boards. Not only could he rebound, he would kick it out and move. And when he went up, he would carry you with him. If you were on his shoulders, you went with him.
I'd never seen anybody come down the court as Maurice did one time at Mellon Court and hit the foul line, go up in the air to take a jump shot, and then realize that somebody might be cutting, and then that person didn't cut, and Maurice did a complete 360 in the air and sunk the jump shot from the foul line.
And he would be there all day. He just worked and worked and worked.
Stokes upgraded the Frankies' image to such a level that the athletic director found it increasingly difficult to schedule games with the bigger schools. In Stokes' sophomore season, the schedule shrank from 30 games to 18.
Teams were staying away from us. We were a small school. They knew that here was a team. If we lose to, it's going to ruin our reputation.
His height was about 6'7", and I think we listed him as 6'5" or something, just to dissuade people from rejecting us from the schedule.
With ticket sales booming, St. Francis moved its home games from a 500-seat gym to one that held 3,300.
They used to have to bring the sheriff in to get the people out from sitting in the hallways or in the steps, you know. That's how crowded it was.
Growing up in central Pennsylvania, my first memories are people talking about him with almost a reverence, a mystique. People say, oh, yeah, you got to see Stokes. Stokes is unbelievable.
We were playing John Carroll in Cleveland, and there was a referee there who was, for the first half I noticed, he was following all over the court. So at halftime I got hold of him and I said, what's going on? He said, Father, he said, I've been waiting for a couple of years to see this kid play ball. And he said, I'm not going to miss anything.
He was the team, and we knew that he was the team, and we knew that when we got the ball, he was to have it as soon as possible, and then good things would happen from that point on.
As a junior, he averaged 23 points and 22 rebounds. Dominant on the court, Stokes found campus life considerably more challenging.
He indicates that he was lonely, that it was very difficult for him because he was a black man in a white person's world, and it really wasn't easy from that respect. And there were no black women on campus at the time.
There were times when we would go to dances. A lot of the white girls would ask to dance, and he would say to them, nah, it doesn't look good. He would never dance with a white girl.
He just managed to fit in, and he liked everybody, and that was his big power, is the fact that he was open to anybody and everybody, and he mixed in well, and he never sat alone.
He gradually developed acceptance, I think, because of his personality and also because of his success. Many of the people here just idolized him by the time he left.
He didn't scare you when you looked at Maurice. He was a jovial guy, intelligent guy, and he knew the groundwork. He knew how to say hello when he should and back off when he had to do that also.
You can't equate easygoing with being acquiescent. He was raised in a strong family with strong values, and that's what he carried through with him. But he had a steel backbone and knew exactly what he had to do.
That backbone pushed St. Francis to a 22-9 record in 1954, when the team played in college basketball's biggest dance, the National Invitation Tournament.
The NCAA was nothing. The NIT was your big, major tournament because everyone wanted to play at Madison Square Garden, and of course, that was the greatest place to be seen.
People were magnetized to him. We only played 2 games in the NIT in '54, but he was on the all-tournament team. He just started to get big press.
The next season, St. Francis returned to the NIT and advanced to the semifinals. In a 79-73 overtime loss to the second-seeded Dayton Flyers, Stokes scored 43 points and hauled down 19 rebounds in one of the most exciting performances in tournament history.
He is the only player in the history of the NIT tournament to win an MVP award playing for the 4th place team. And I think his stock really clearly went up in the eyes of so many people at that point, including NBA scouts.
His performance in the 1955 tournament was absolutely astounding. He just devastated people. The New York media could say nothing that wasn't glowing about the performance of Stokes.
I'll never forget the New York writers characterizing us as Maurice Stokes and his unskilled but scrappy cohorts.
In 1955, Maurice Stokes was drafted number 2 overall by the Rochester Royals. Pittsburgh native Jack Twyman was the team's 2nd pick, and Stokes' Westinghouse High teammate Ed Fleming was selected 3rd.
We were about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. And we were nervous. We didn't know what we were getting into. Anybody that played basketball, the epitome of what you're striving for is to play in the NBA.
Stokes and Fleming soon learned that NBA credentials offered little protection from racism in Rochester.
At that time, they had a section called the Black Bottom, and it was like a line through town that black people lived, and we were channeled into that area. And neither one of us were really happy about that at that time.
Little things that people deal with in a common sense manner for any human being. He didn't have to take those things for granted. Where am I going to eat at the end of a game? The dignity that you leave a man with. What did Maurice Stokes encounter? He must have encountered an awful lot that was extremely difficult for him to deal with, particularly a guy who was as competitive, as proud, as strong as he was.
We went into St. Louis and we walked into a restaurant and they wouldn't serve us. Stokes was a highly intelligent fella. He wasn't going to make an issue out of it. He just got up and he even said, I believe he said, stay. And we said, no. And the whole team got up and walked out with him.
He was so different, such a hackneyed phrase, role model. He was more than a role model. He was a person who brought out the best in you.
I never really thought of Maurice as black. Maurice, he was Maurice. He wasn't black or white to me. He was a heck of a basketball player.
On the court, where talent is the measure of a man, Stokes was immediately crowned king of all he surveyed.
Probably the best opening act in NBA history was conducted by Maurice Stokes in his NBA debut against the New York Knickerbockers at the Rochester War Memorial. Maurice Stokes had 32 points, 20 rebounds, and 8 assists.
He was only 6'7", but he rebounded like an 8-footer, and he was tough. I mean, he left a lot of bodies lying in the paint when he went up for rebounds.
Maurice Stokes gathers in his 26th rebound and leads a fast break.
He did physically things that we hadn't seen before. He was the forerunner of the quick, fast, athletic power forwards of the future.
He strove to be a perfectionist on the basketball court. When we'd go to the court in the morning, we'd shoot fouls for 2 hours, and then we'd shoot jump shots. You take 20, I'll take 20.
And he wasn't very vocal, except if you committed an error for the second or third time, then he'd tell you about it.
Leading the league in rebounding average, the 6'7", 240-pound Stokes was voted the 1956 Rookie of the Year and given a new car.
Nobody knew that in Pittsburgh, when he was growing up, he never had a car, and he never needed a car.
Well, Maurice was never really interested in driving. He had his chauffeur, and that was me.
So he won this car, and somebody had to drive it to a used car lot to sell it.
He traded that in, got a larger automobile, and then he became interested in driving. But even then, when we would go somewhere, he would say, Ed, you better drive because I'm not really ready for the highway.
Maurice liked to have his quiet time. He liked to have his private time. He loved music. He loved to read. You would always see him on the road, curled up with a book.
He would joke around and be a little bit of a prankster and stuff. And he liked to needle. So he was always in on the fun. He was always doing something. He was mischievous.
We were in Toronto one night. It was the night before an exhibition game, and I walked into Mo's room, and it was like a concert studio. The music was gorgeous, and there was a terrific state-of-the-art stereo set there playing the music. I said, Mo, did that come with the room? He said, no. He says, I take it with me wherever I go on the road. He says, it's the only friend I have on the road. And there may have been some significance there that maybe he was a lonesome person.
Who knows the reason why things happen to you? I know we talked about that one time when we were a little bit younger, and this doesn't do any good because you have no control.
After setting a league rebounding record in 1957, Stokes seemed in perfect control the following season in the Royals' new home of Cincinnati, averaging 18 rebounds, 17 points, and 6 assists. With the Royals in the hunt for a playoff spot, Stokes turned up his game to a new high.
And that's the best I had seen anyone play the last 3 or 4 games of that season with Maurice. It's like you're playing a little harder defense, he's rebounding a little bit harder and driving, and then just scrapping, getting on the floor to get the loose balls. He just did it all.
Having long since clinched a playoff spot, the Royals were playing the Minneapolis Lakers in the last game of the season on March 12, 1958.
I can remember him coming in the outside lane on a fast break, and, somebody went for the block or whatever, but it knocked him down pretty hard.
Maurice went over the back of one of their players, hit the ground, was unconscious for a bit.
It made a sound, sure. A big guy like him. A thud. A thud.
I've seen him many times take raps, get knocked into baskets, get knocked over scoring tables, and right back up again. So it didn't dawn on us at the time, the significance of the injury.
Our trainer went out to tend him home. He was stunned somewhat. He laid there for a minute or two, and they got him up. He shook it off. He was a tough guy.
He regained consciousness and rejoined the game. He went back into the game.
The Royals beat the Lakers 96-89. Stokes did not complain of any ill effects as the team traveled to Detroit. He was in the lineup for the first playoff game.
We lost the game. I do remember that Maurice wasn't himself in that. After watching him play 70-some games, you knew, what he could do and what he couldn't do.
Even though Maurice had a double-double in that game, he seemed lethargic. He seemed listless.
After the game, on the way back on the bus to the airport, he was taken ill, and he started to throw up, regurgitate.
I can remember being in the airport, and Maurice came in, and I think it was Richie Regan and Dick Ricketts. He was hung over them. They were almost dragging him in. They took him in the restroom, and the comment was that Maurice wasn't feeling very well.
He told Ricketts he felt so bad he thought he was going to die, and he picked up a bit when he was at the airport and he was browsing through some magazines, and that's the last time I saw him. I said, "Are you feeling any better?" And he said he was. He thought he'd get back to Cincinnati.
I remember going up the ramp. I was right behind him, and he just collapsed.
I ran to go to the counter to get a doctor, and he told him he was all right, and they called me back. We boarded the plane.
Back in those years, there was the Harris tweed sport coat. It was a heavy wool sport coat, and Maurice had one on, and after about 10 minutes, he was so wet, it was as if somebody took him by the head and dunked him in a swimming pool. His whole outfit was just soaking wet.
The eyes were sort of rolling back in his head a little bit.
And then he started gagging and then convulsing. It was more of a convulsion type of illness at that point. And then the loss of breath and gagging and couldn't breathe.
Pretty soon they were running oxygen down to him, and all of a sudden we realized that he was really sick.
The captain said, "We're 30 minutes away from Cincinnati. Let's wire ahead, have an ambulance waiting for us."
We all waited on the plane while they took Maurice off, and the red lights were flashing and everything, and Maurice, from what I could see at the time, was pretty much out of it.
That scene of all the lights was what really kind of stood with me all these years. I can still see those red lights and those white lights, not knowing what really had happened. None of us did.
When we got into the hospital, and then when the doctors came in, they said, this doesn't look good. He might not last the night. Upon arriving there, Maurice was packed in ice, had a temperature of 104 plus, and was in and out of consciousness. If there was no one in the room, he would be asleep, unconscious, so to speak. And when you call his name, rub his arm or his feet, he would open his eyes. And I'll never forget when I said Maurice, and he obviously recognized my voice, and he opened his eyes and he started to cry. I was devastated. He was trying to speak, but nothing would come out. No words would come out.
I would almost draw a parallel between Christopher Reeve, Superman paralyzed. In a lot of ways, Maurice Stokes was basketball Superman at the time, and there he was, totally unable to function.
While Stokes lay in a coma, the Royals were sold for two prices.
For $200,000, if Maurice remained sick, $225,000 if he got well and was able to play again.
When Stokes emerged after weeks in a coma, it was clear that his NBA career was over. His body paralyzed, Stokes was unable to speak.
His mind was perfect. We would communicate by blinking his eyelids. Before M happens to be the mid-letter in the alphabet. So if it was before M, just try and spell out a word, he would blink his eyes.
It's A, B, C. I'd say C, like that. Then I get the next word, the next letter, until I get a word, you know. That's how we started off.
Diagnosed with a brain injury that affected his motor control center, Stokes likely faced a future locked in immobility.
The little brain tissue that's left is sort of disconnected, short-circuited by scar tissue and what have you. You can want to lift your hand, but there's no connection from the thinking of it to the hand to say, move.
We all wanted to do one thing, and that was to do what was best for Maurice. The parents were elderly. They were not from Cincinnati. At the time, it was very difficult to move Maurice back to Pittsburgh, and they weren't in a position economically to move from Pittsburgh.
When it became clear that Stokes needed someone to look after him in Cincinnati, Jack Twyman stepped into the role as his legal guardian.
He was a man without a team. Everybody had left, as is the case in professional basketball. The bags are packed when the last game's over, away they go. I was in town. I lived here.
I don't know how my parents or the family would have solved the problem of his long-term care. So it was a gift, actually, that he did what he did for him.
We talk about unions and how powerful they are now. There was literally nothing back then. In fact, Jack Twyman had to get an attorney friend to battle for the workman's compensation that was due Maurice Stokes. I mean, now we would laugh at such a thing.
We proved that he was injured in a ball game. As a result, he was qualified for state of Ohio workers' comp benefits, which he got. And now they didn't pay all of his expenses, but it was wonderful.
They didn't hang out together a lot, or they wasn't buddies on the team. But after this happened, then Jack took over, and then a great relationship developed between those two because of this.
I don't think any of the other ball players lived in the community other than Jack, and there was no one at all who played with Jack that would have taken that stand. I admire Jack for that. I truly do.
Through the summer and fall of 1958, Stokes dedicated himself to a rigorous physical therapy regimen.
He always thought that one of these days he would come out of it, the same way that he went into it, you know.
Maurice wanted to be able to be Maurice, if not in the athletic world, and just to be able to communicate with people, to go and come, to do the things that he enjoyed doing.
Jack Twyman would go there, his teammate, at night, and stay in there over the bed. And Maurice would just be staring, you know, and he wouldn't be moving.
And now there came a moment when Twyman came back, and Twyman would hold conversations with the wall. And the nurse said, "We have a surprise for you today." The nurse said, "Tell him who you are, Mr. Stokes." And he said, "Mo."
Couldn't shut him up. And he was so proud of himself whenever he would have a minor or major accomplishment like that. He couldn't wait to share it.
Sometimes when Jack would had a basketball game, say, and Maurice would watch it on television, when they got together, Maurice would tell Jack what he did wrong.
I was very careful not to be maudlin with him. He demanded to be treated as an equal, and everybody that came to see him. It was hard at the first couple of visits because you're shocked, but after a while he made you feel totally relaxed.
He had a certain smile that he would do. He couldn't physically grab you and hold you and shake hands, but he'd give you that smile and you knew where you stood.
When he got to a point that he was able to move his fingers, we approached IBM and they gave him an electric typewriter. And we'd strap his arms right over the keys and he'd type out like that.
His first message was to his friend, Jack Twyman.
Everybody said, you know, isn't it wonderful what you did? But I benefited a great deal from it.
He still had the ability to really affect people. The nurses, he had a following of young ladies coming to see him all the time. I asked him, how do you do that? And he just kind of laughed at that, you know.
At the time of his accident, Stokes had a girlfriend named Dorothy Parsons.
She's the one who spent all her time up there when he got sick first. Then she could tell that he's going to be there for a long time. And so she went and asked him what she should do.
He was not going to put his problem on Dorothy's shoulders, and it was a very difficult thing. That Maurice was the one that said, we have to end this relationship because I'm not going to burden you.
Despite his loss of movement, Stokes was determined to be a positive force in the lives of others.
I met Maurice when I was a young boy. All my life, basically spent time in the hospital trying to correct some damage done by a childhood disease. There's many days when you just don't think you're going to make it, and so what's the use? And I guess I saw in a man that had it far worse than myself, but you knew he never gave up.
He would come up from therapy soaking wet. He was working so hard. That's very unusual, I think. It would have been very easy for him to say, oh, the hell with it. I can't face this. Why me?
The tragedy is, how great would he have been? How much did basketball miss?
In 1960, the Royals drafted Oscar Robertson. What miracles of power and grace would have been performed by a tandem of Mo and the Big O?
They were so smart. They were so good at all aspects of the game, from scoring to rebounding to ball handling and passing. I think it would have been an unstoppable combination. I truly believe the Celtics would not have won as many titles in a row. That I think that the Royals clearly could have won some titles.
We would talk about that a lot, and I think he would have given anything to have been able to play during that era of the Celtics' dominance of the NBA.
It just boggles my mind to think of someone in that situation to have so much taken away from you, and not be bitter, and not feel self-pity, or at least not express it, and to not want to withdraw from society, which would have been understandable, and to want to go on, to really want to go on.
That's it. Excellent.
When we return, confined in a Cincinnati hospital, Maurice Stokes makes his last stand.
Americans like people who don't give up. They love people who don't give up because in their heart of hearts, they say, that ain't me. I probably would quit. And nobody fought harder, and no athlete ever touched more people than Maurice Stokes.
To see the way he conducted himself, I just stood in awe of him. I mean, it got so bad when I would be having a bad day myself, I would go to see Maurice selfishly to say, I want to get pumped up. And he never failed to pump me up.
Jack Twyman's concern bridged a tremendous gap and helped people to become more sensitive to the fact that a white person could be concerned about a black person if he were at a disadvantage in life.
Symbolically, the difference in their races was vitally important because we're entering the heyday of the civil rights movement, and it was very important for people in this country to see a partnership like that between black and white, that it could actually work.
If the black-white symbolism was good for the country, there was the practical matter of paying the mounting hospital costs. While the state of Ohio covered a portion of the medical expenses, the shortfall was huge, forcing Stokes and Twyman to depend upon private donations.
In '58, the fall after Maurice took sick, Milton Kutcher sought me out and said, I have this hotel in the Catskills. My hotel is at your disposal. Let's have a game in the summer. Let's raise money.
A summer tradition was born. The first Maurice Stokes charity game was in 1959 as top players paid their own travel expenses.
In the first game, we probably had 60 or 70 players show up. And the total motivation was, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
One day, Stokes was well enough to travel, and they brought him to the game. And it was one of the most moving things I saw, the way the players lined up to hug him.
At one time, before the game, he was introduced. I think he really tried to get up out of that chair and stand up. You could just see him flexing everywhere, but it just wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be.
Seeing those players come back and talk with him, it meant so much to Maurice. And I'm sure he questioned himself at times. I know I would have. Why can't I do something like this anymore?
All of us associated with Maurice are very gratified and confident that he's going to keep going and going to get out of that hospital and get back to where he can be a productive citizen again. We're all looking forward to that point.
I think it made us aware of a lot of things. That accidents can happen. Injuries are a part of sport. And it also collectively, made us more aware of pension plan and in case of, a lot of those types of things.
On the rare occasion when Stokes felt well enough to travel, he could be found having dinner at the Twyman home.
It was so important to him. He looked forward to it very much. And that gave him the motivation to continue to improve and not laying there with nothing to look forward to.
One June day in 1969, the leaders of St. Francis College gathered at Twyman's home to discuss with Stokes the naming of their new athletic center.
I asked him, would he mind if we named the building after him? And there was no reaction. The only reaction was tears in his eyes.
He had so much on his mind. I learned very early on that he wasn't interested in just sports, but he knew a lot about what was going on in the world. And he wanted to express those feelings and often couldn't. He was very much in support of Martin Luther King. He looked up to him. He had developed a collection of poetry by Langston Hughes. He liked jazz very much. He didn't dwell on his losses, but just tried to increase his abilities.
Nearly a decade after his injury, Stokes had made small but significant physical progress.
And yet, towards the end of his life, that last year, he was able to walk a couple steps. And if you were with him for any length of time, you were able to understand his speech.
Good morning, Maury. How are you this morning? You don't know?
He was determined that he was going to get better, and he would have. I swear, I think so.
On April 6, 1970, 12 years after his collapse on the plane, Maurice Stokes died of a heart attack. He was 36.
And my perception is that he just worked so hard that his heart gave out.
That was for the best for Maurice. You know, he was there a long time, and she suffered a long time. So, you know, I think there was a relief.
Stokes had asked to be buried on the grounds of St. Francis College. At the memorial service, Father Vince used just one word to describe Maurice Stokes.
I call him a saint. And that probably created a little stir because you don't confer sainthood on just an ordinary basketball player. But I really think that sainthood is includes holiness and living a good life and kindness and charity. And he had all of that, and he had it to perfection. And he suffered unbelievably and never complained about it.
Remarkable guy. In a sense, he's one of those people whom you meet and observe and say he's too good to be true, but he is.
You can inspire as a basketball player, you can revolutionize the game, but that's fleeting. What he was dealing with was life and life's severest problems. And so those last 12 years and what he did and how he inspired others, that was the remarkable legacy. It showed the measure of the man.
He was a great inspiration to me and my family, the 12 years that we were exposed to him. And I think about that a lot. And I think about how fortunate we were to have known this person.
On April 5th, 2004, one day short of the 34th anniversary of his death, and after a long letter-writing campaign led by Jack Twyman, Maurice Stokes gained entry to the Basketball Hall of Fame to join the game's great forwards. Although his NBA career was cut short, his memory remains long among those who saw him play. Former pro athletes and celebrities still journey each summer to the Catskill Mountains in New York to participate in a golf tournament bearing his name. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.